Right. Welcome and good morning. My name is Lynn Bailey. I am the CEO of Index Data, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural World Open Library Foundation Conference. Thank you all for being here. It is really exciting to see this crowd, and on behalf of the OLE Libraries, EBSCO, and Index Data, we'd like to thank you for coming and tell you that we are delighted to be sponsoring this conference. I'd also like to thank Bywater and Archivum for contributing to the reception last night, which was awesome. And Duke University, who's going to be hosting and sponsoring tonight's reception. It's hard to believe, particularly for my team, that it was just about a year ago that we transitioned from having primarily internal development meetings for Folio to opening it up to the broader community. And today we have close to 200 people here, which is just stunning. And quite frankly, has exceeded our wildest expectations and has provided some logistical challenges, those of you that were here for lunch yesterday, among other things. So. I just want to apologize in advance if there's some hiccups. This is a learning experience for us, but it's all positive, it's all exciting, and this is a great community to be doing this with, so I know that we're just going to get better and better at this, and we thank you for your patience. Every time we get together, we notice something that's really unique about this community, and while this conference is focused primarily on Folio, the OLF Foundation has other interesting partners, and as each conference continues, there's going to be more and more representation. But this Folio community really is characterized by a warm and welcoming tone, and I think I spoke to a number of folks last night at the reception about your experiences sitting in on some of the meetings, and everybody is always jazzed about the conversations and how interesting and welcoming people are, and I just want to encourage everybody to use this not as a typical conference, but as a place to dive in, ask questions, participate. This is a collaborative project, as everybody knows, and I really think that the most you're going to get out of this is by getting in with both feet and really participating. So I encourage you to do that. Each of the sessions is going to be having a moderator because we are really focused on we're on a tight timeline, and so we need to stay focused. And in each of the sessions, there's going to be moderator notes that have Zoom links so that you can dial in remote team members. You can record the sessions, and we encourage you to do that. There's going to be a link to keep notes, keep track of notes, and we'd like each of the sessions to use those links and provide notes about your sessions so everybody can share that information. One of the things that you will find challenging over the next few days is that because the schedule is so tight, there's not a lot of time for questions, and we know there are going to be a lot of questions. So we are doing our best to fly through the presentations and leave time for questions, but in the event that there isn't enough time, we do have, under the Notes tab, a section for unanswered questions that we're going to keep tabs of, and we will provide answers to in the best way we can. We'll try to get those out to everybody. So some logistics before we get started. The bathrooms are on the mezzanine level, and in this hotel that is between floors 1 and 2. It's a little tricky. The tags that you have stickers, and for those of you that don't know where a room is or have other questions, there's a registration desk also on floor 2, so feel free to ask any of us that have either B's on stickers or at the registration desk for advice and directions. Lunch, like breakfast, is served in the main gallery here, but we're also using this space as conference space. So anybody that is in this main gallery for their session needs to be aware of the time, because at 12:30 it will be descended upon for lunch. So you're going to need to kind of keep tight to your schedules. Tonight's reception is hosted by Duke, and we will have buses at the front of the hotel beginning at 5:30 to take you to Duke. There was going to be a tour of the campus, but that's kind of changed a little bit, and Andrea Leugman is going to be doing a informal walk around the campus. So anybody that is interested in going to see the campus before the reception should take that 5:30 bus. After that, the buses will just run continuously. All right. Now I would like to just kick off the session by having each of the founding stakeholders come up, introduce themselves, share a little bit about their unique perspectives. We're going to start with Michael Winkler, representing the Ole Libraries. He will hand off to Gar Sidnor from EBSCO, and then to Sebastian Hammer, who will then go into an overview and vision of the platform, and from there, a discussion of the workflows with some other team members. So once again, thank you for being here.
Cool. Hey, everybody. Hey. So welcome. This is really amazing. I mean, like Lynn said, we had a plan. I mean, all of us got our heads together and we said, so how many people are you going to send? How many people are you going to send? Yes. Yep. 5 by 5. Boy, that's loud. How's that? Is that better? So we had planned for about 110 people. You know, if you want to count off, we can start with Sebastian. No? So a lot of people are here, and that's really great. We're really pleased at the turnout, and it's just a reflection of the energy and the excitement that's going on around Folio. So it's great to see that. It's great to feel it. And over the next couple of days, let's try to leverage that. You know, we're here together. Let's feed off of that energy and really try to get some work done. It's a great time to do some heads down thinking, work with the people that you've been working with virtually. But it's also a good time to make connections out. So we really would encourage that as well. Boy, I'm a real problem with the AV, aren't I? You won't care about this, but I'm going to report it anyway. We had 2 board meetings yesterday. The Open Library Foundation, which is the parent organization for the Folio project, met. Folio was a big topic of discussion there, and the success that it's been having, and the challenges that it poses over the next year or two. So it was a successful meeting. There'll be some changes coming out of that. Nothing too earth-shattering, though. We also had a stakeholders meeting. The stakeholders are EBSCO Index Data and Ole partners got together and discussed the project. And one of the big topics of discussion revolved around resourcing and how to get additional resources into the project, both attracting new partners and organizations coming to the project, but what the 3 stakeholders can do to encourage more participation and more investment in Folio as well. So some real good outcomes there. And then we capped the day with a great reception on the rooftop over at the Durham, which was a lot of fun. I do really want to emphasize that a lot of people have come a long way to get here. A lot of people have done a lot of hard work getting ready for this meeting. So we really want you to take advantage of it, really try to get as much of it out of it as you can. As Lynn said, we're trying to build in time for questions, but there's plenty of time around hallways and at receptions and those sort of things. Even yesterday, I saw people just grouping in corners and finding couches that they could sit on. So we really encourage that. That's the most important thing about the meeting. I do want to make an announcement about the LA partnership. This is a reflection of how Folio has a certain momentum and a certain attractiveness to folks. So the Ole partners are adding new partners. We've added 3 new partners in the last year, all related to the Folio effort that we're involved in. So University of Colorado, Auburn University, and the Fenway Library Organization joined the OLE partnership, and today I can announce that the University of Leipzig in Germany is also joining, and very likely will be adding thank you. We'll be adding another partner. So my guess is that Gar and Sebastian both could talk about how Folio has helped their organizations as well, but it's been very good to OLE. So we're really glad about our decision to pivot towards Folio and to invest in it. I encourage all of you to just dive in and engage as aggressively as you can with your peers and partners, but also take a step back and look at this room and look at this meeting and look at how much work is going to be going on this week, and try to appreciate just how big this project is. This is probably the largest project in our domain going on. And it's very interesting to think about that this is a volunteer organization, essentially, is that all of you are here because you believe in this mission and you want to see this software develop, and you want to see this community really make changes to the way libraries operate. So take that opportunity to think a little bit about the bigger picture, and there's plenty of presentations where you can get a sense of that. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Gar. You want the lavalier or the microphone?
Blow that out.
Yeah, it's loud.
You guys hear me all right about it? Check. Okay. How's that? Good, good? Okay, great. I get louder as I go, so I might blow this thing out. Good morning. Well, Mike took a little bit of my thunder because I was going to make a comment about the size of the group, and I'll introduce myself first. My name is Gar Sidner. I'm the Vice President of Folio Services at EBSCO. I'm new to the project, not new to the effort, but new to this particular role. And again, I want to congratulate you on the size of your group, the diversity of your group, the quality of your group. I also want to congratulate the folks that helped put this together. And I mean from, if you've ever put together a meeting and you planned on 100 and you got 190, you know what kind of effort that entails. And I also want to include all the folks that helped with the agendas and with all the meeting prep that's going on this week. So give yourselves a pat on the back, but nice job. So we are a diverse group. I think we're represented globally, everywhere from China to Europe to Latin America. So fantastic sized group. And I thought we'd just start going around the room and introducing ourselves. And yeah, it might not work. Okay, so I'll start with myself instead. I started with EBSCO a little over 20 years ago. I've been involved with large projects, small projects. My first project was helping to launch EBSCO Host. In the intervening years, I've worked with an ILS to do, again, modules and whole system launches, and I'm excited to be here. The common trait in a lot of those projects has been that I've had the great opportunity to work with experts, folks that are really just committed, that know what they're doing and know where they're going, and they want to do great things for libraries, and it's an exciting way to go to work. And over that time, I've become kind of a student of group dynamics and behaviors, and I think in particular teamwork. Now, this is not going to be one of those stupid corporate teamwork exercises. We're not going to do clapping exercises and that kind of thing, but I do want to introduce the idea of collaboration. If any of you are big fans of the Pee Wee Herman series when you were kids or in college, the word for the day is collaborate. Okay, watch, yeah. Collaborate. You know, I don't want to be preachy, but you tend to have a pretty good idea of how to talk about something when it's one of your own shortcomings. So I'm saying this with all humility. When we collaborate, we've all been in situations actually where someone has collaborated on us. You know the scenario, right? Yeah. We're going to collaborate until you get it right. And that's not what I'm talking about. I want to go back to the idea where it's more of a giving thing. When in a group like this, where you have so many experts, collaborate means to listen, to appreciate our perspectives and the problems that we're trying to solve, empathy for others, creativity, and I always like to say, just have a smile. That covers over an awful lot of misunderstandings. The fact is, there are many right ways. Ooh, there are many right ways. I like that. See, I've already violated. I've impressed myself. But the point is that if you have confidence and the confidence really to be humble in these situations, a lot of great things can happen. This is a fantastic project, and you guys, I've spent a lot of time learning about the history of Folio. I understand the first meeting was a much smaller gathering, so you've grown in size. That's fantastic. And at EBSCO, we are cognizant of the fact that this is an open source project, and we're kind of the big corporate entity here. But the fact is, it's a big project. It's a necessary role. But I do want to clarify some things that, if they've gotten misconstrued, I want to reinforce the commitment that EBSCO has to this project and the way that we see it. It's essentially this. Years down the road, hopefully very soon now, whether there are tens, hundreds, or thousands of libraries using Folio, what we understand and what I hope you all are all working for is libraries that had their own choice in who hosted their system, whether they wanted to do it themselves or contract with any vendor of their choice, made their own choices in the migration, made their own choices in which modules they wanted to use and which ones they did not, made their own choices and how they wanted to support the system, and made their own choices on how it would work with other systems on their campus or in their institutions. We're a diverse group here. We're represented by many different factions. Vendors, developers, librarians, all of these things. We all have our own dreams and aspirations, but the point is that that road to whatever summits we want to reach goes through a platform that we can all share, one that can potentially work for all of us so we can achieve those personal, professional, or institutional goals that we've set for ourselves. And that's really all EBSCO wants to see as well, that whole idea of choice and the freedom and flexibility that that offers. That would be a successful mission for us, and we would be excited to see that. So I hope you all are able to make some progress this week. And I think perhaps a few years from now, when we are triple, quadruple, 10 times this size, we can look back on our quaint little gathering here and remember when we were just talking about the early days. But thank you for the time here, and thank you all for being here this week.
Morning, everybody. Let me attach this thing, see if this works. So this is indeed slightly humbling, and it reminds me a little bit of some of the earliest meetings and conversations that we had in Folio when it was just. Most meetings would have fit within one sedan. You know, we tend to be like 3 or 4 people talking about this project, and I've been really fortunate to be able to spend most of my time, both personally and with my team at Index Data over the past 2.5 years on Folio. And one of the things that strikes me is, at the time, in some ways, this seemed very unlikely. It seemed unlikely because the kind of leap of faith that you'd have to imagine EBSCO making to engage with an endeavor this large, this uncontrollable, this explosive, must have really made some people think hard. I have an enormous amount of respect for the guts that it took to throw themselves into this, and gratitude for enabling us to spend the amount of time and resources and energy that we have in trying to support and build the community from the technology side. I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for the OLE libraries and for the OLE organization for having the courage to make a 180-degree turn and to throw away essentially years of work, and recognizing that there was a different path they could take. Having said that, there were early conversations when we were working to try to figure out what the message of Folio was that I remember really strongly. And we all came in with different perspectives. You know, EBSCO's perspective as a large company, as a service provider, as a service organization, all they representing libraries. There were many, many conversations between the three of us, between each of us and our various constituencies and groups that we worked with. And the perspective that I felt that I brought came out of having worked with index data for about 25 years now. I started the company with Adam over in the corner in '94 in Copenhagen. The internet, as something known outside of universities, was very new. The cathedral and the bazaar had not been written. Koha was still about 6 years in the future at that point. And nobody really had any sense of what open source meant to libraries, or really much of a sense of what open source meant outside of closed academic environments. You know, Linux was just taking off at that point, was beginning to go semi-vertical. And somehow we got into this mode of working with open source software almost by default. And by some miracle have managed to kind of keep it going for 25 years. And one of the things that I've realized, you do something for 25 years, you think about the mechanics of the structure of it. And one of the things that I brought into Folio, I think, was a realization that open source software is very powerful stuff. And there's something to open source software that isn't about costs, that isn't just about risk management. It's not about the price of kittens, of beer, of freedom. There's a much more powerful element going on. And for me, the big elements that I brought into it was the notion that open source software is a mode of conversation that has a way of breaking down barriers. You know, we had participated in lots and lots of collaborative projects and environments where there would be open source involved, or there would not be open source involved. And there was a marked difference between the conversations where open source was involved and then once where it weren't. It is somehow a social lubricant for collaboration, and it breaks down barriers. And the other thing that I think we had noticed is that open source software has the ability to change communities. It has the ability to change the nature of the landscape around it. You create a piece of software that makes something easy that was hard before, and all of a sudden you enable all of these things to happen that couldn't happen before. And over time, even releasing some small toolkit that makes some task easier can change the direction of an entire industry. So we learned from the sort of success in some really obscure corner of the library industry that we'd worked in, that we could have a large impact. And what I learned from the early conversation with, especially Olay, with Michael Winkler and EBSCO too, is that if you take that sort of weird power that open source software has, and you add it to the idea of institutional engagement, of strategic engagement with a collaborative project, you have a really potent mix. You can make really large things happen. And so once we got over this notion that it was really unlikely that we were all sitting there in a room together, we started to feel a certain sense of awe about the scope of the thing that we had in our hands. Because we knew going in that Folio in some sense would be the largest, one of the largest commercially funded, probably the largest commercially funded open source project in libraries. Maybe so fairly high on the list of commercially funded open source projects anywhere. But the thing that really struck us was how easily that message started to come together across these 33 different organizations, right? And how resonant that message was when we started to talk to other people about it. And if I were to synthesize what the message is, or what the goal of Folio is in 3 words, I would say it is community ownership of platform. It's recognizing that platforms have enormous transformative power, right? They lower the cost of innovation, of experimentation. They provide freedom of choice, potentially. they create a leverage effect. So whenever you add to your platform, the entire platform becomes bigger and stronger. And if we have a platform environment where we're all contributing, then everybody benefits from the things that happen in the farthest corners, and people can come together around this platform and see it unfold in different directions, use it for different purposes. But the community ownership aspect is key, because in a privately owned platform, there's going to be an owner of that platform somewhere that benefits from everything. There's going to be a landlord. And we used to talk about walled gardens, 10 years ago, and the frustration of proprietary APIs and the way that they would tie developers into closed environments. With the platform economies, you start to feel like it's not just walled gardens, it's fiefdoms. We end up with economies where these few companies that own the infrastructure that we would live and work in have essentially all of the power, right? And Folio recognizes the transformative power of platforms, but say, wouldn't it be awesome if we all owned as a community that platform? We decide as a community what things talk together, what things integrate across different systems and so on. And that's for me the transformative vision of this. So I'd like to do, by way of, I don't know why I get asked to do this. I think people like to watch me squirm. But I was asked to say something about the vision of Folio as a way of trying to put this meeting in a larger context. And I would like to try to offer, as has Mike and Guy, a little bit of perspective or a suggestion for how people might approach this meeting as you think about your participation in the different groups. Because as has been said, it really is it's a working meeting. And one of the fun things about being here is recognizing all the faces that I know from Slack sessions, from Zoom meetings, from SIGs, from Product Council. A lot of you guys know this project inside and out and don't need to know this, but I do feel like these meetings were created for a specific purpose to try to create cohesion in a virtual group, and to allow us to kind of, sometimes I think about Folio moving forward with all of these distributed independent teams as, the initial race in a triathlon with everybody jumping into the water and swimming along like crazy. And then once in a while, you need to stick your head up over the water to get a sense of where you are. And these meetings, I think from the very beginning, has served that purpose. Even when we were just 20 people meeting, we'd stick our head up and we'd say, hey, does this still make sense? Do a gut check. And adjust direction. So this was the very first slide that I ever showed of Folio at Code for Lib in 2016. My graphics were are still, I think, rather sort of 80s and 90s in their sort of design. Although I now try to squeeze things a little bit more. Now I do 90s style designs with a B on them. But at the time that this was written, this was presented, and it's occurring to me as I think about where this meeting fits into some larger story or the larger evolution of Folio, to think of it as us now beginning a third phase of the project. And the first phase was about ideation. It was about the partners coming together and realizing, yeah, we want the same thing here. And there's this much larger community that we think would want to do this thing with us. And it was about establishing the platform, the foundation of the system. And this was something that was largely done by a fairly small group of people coming together from the three organizations. And it took a long time, and it involved a lot of conversations with people from the Code for Lib community, with people from Olay, trying to understand how could we create a platform that could live up to the aspirations and the frustrations that people felt, and that could meet this potential for growth and impact that we thought Folio could have. And it was probably the most terrifying part of the project for me, in a sense, because I felt that if we got that wrong, that everything else would kind of tumble. And there were sort of two key elements in forming it. And one was the idea that we wanted that platform to be amenable, applicable to as many different situations as we could make it. We wanted to have a really low bar of entry. But the other element of it was we had this idea of the platform interpreted in the broadest possible way as essentially an operating system, as a thing that you could run apps on. And we'd figure out along the way what that actually meant. When we made that, we had no clue what that might look like in a browser, on a screen, on a phone. We just had this idea of apps because we saw the transformative impact that phones had. We wanted to have the same kind of free-form ability to adapt to local needs, to support experimentation in different areas that we saw in smartphones, and the effect that they have had in some ways on the way that we build larger systems as well. So we spent the first year or so figuring out how we'd approach this platform and building the first version of what became Okapi Stripes, really with the focus of building something that was as lean as possible, as lightweight as possible, where no part was so big that we couldn't throw it away. It felt critical to recognize that any technology that we might choose would eventually become outdated and outmoded. We'd want to replace it with something else, where even the approaches that we took to storing data would be fully replaceable and modular, could be tossed away. So the folio could be picked up and used potentially in an entirely different environment, or in a different domain, if you will, and so that we could learn over time and adapt folio to whatever the future holds in terms of bibliographic metadata, in terms of processes, in terms of whatever libraries are doing 10 years from now, where even Okapi and Stripes could be tossed away. But we tried to base it on the most solid, the most forward-looking industry technologies that we could find, and then do as little damage to those as we possibly could, introduce the smallest possible amount of structure on top of them to support the idea of replaceable apps in a collaborative ecosystem. So that rolled out somewhere around the late summer of 16, and we began the process of building our first app. And it probably took 6 to 8 months to build the first single app, because we realized all the things that we had gotten wrong on the platform itself. But alongside that, we were also learning how to actually make these apps, right? It was key to the idea of community ownership of the platform that we find a collaborative mode of creating specifications, of figuring out how to work together. So the special interest group, the concept of special interest groups to represent things like functional needs and cross-functional needs and so on, the word was deliberately chosen in a way to create an idea of transparency, of openness, of advocacy, as opposed to top-down management. We were trying to imagine what a community like Folio would look like 10 years from now. You know, what would it look like if this was to evolve and grow organically? So the idea of SIGs as focal points for interest, for advocacy, birds of a feather, if you will, came out of that. And what evolved also was this process of using the user experience and the UX process as central to our requirements analysis process. And Philip from Samhæng in Denmark were instrumental both in creating and building out together with the IAM SIG, which was the foundational, the first SIG, this process with a lot of patience from the members of the IAM SIG as people were trying to figure this out as they went along, but also creating a vision for what Folio would look like as a system. How would you navigate between apps? What is the distinction between platform affordances and the individual apps? And that vision started to evolve out of those early conversations. And from these sketches, through face-to-face meetings early on, through hundreds, if not thousands of Zoom meetings between different groups over time, evolved eventually the Folio that we all know, right? So characterized by what we hope is an attractive and simple design with navigation across apps with shared features like settings, localization, permission management, and a sort of steadily growing set of platform features. But also this thinking that in order to maximize the impact of our platform, we needed to make these apps as small as they could possibly be. So rather than have large apps, complex apps that represented entire areas of functionality, we wanted to aim for small modular apps representing individual bits of business logic, of data that you needed to maintain, and then look for platform features or other tools to orchestrate those apps into larger and more complex workflows and processes in the library. So we're at a stage right now, I think, and some people might disagree vehemently, but I'd say that we're in a place right now where the set of apps that we believe that we need for V1 are mostly all on the table in terms of understanding basically what they need to do, and at various stages of a pipeline that involves the UX process through analysis to development, testing, and so on. I don't think we'd call any of them entirely done. I think that the user management app, which happens to be that first one that we built, is kind of getting there, and there are lots of others that need a ton of work. But we have a good picture of what these apps look like. And so this kind of gets me to where I think, where I see us being at this meeting, and if there's a theme at all that evolves from this, the different sessions and the conversations that I've had with different people leading up to this meeting, it's a sense of moving from the individual apps, and that includes really thinking about where does data live, what are the data models that represent the different types of business objects that libraries need to work with. This next phase, as we move towards people thinking about implementing and deploying Folio, is going to be a lot about living with Folio. You know, so we've established these apps. We want to keep them small. We want to keep them simple. They should do one thing well. But it's a whole different thing to start to think about what is it actually like to live with Folio in real life. How do you deploy it? How do you run it in an individual library? What's it like to run it at EBSCO for, I forget how many libraries that Gar wanted to see it run, but it was a whole bunch. And we'd like to see a lot of those hosted by EBSCO, so we want it to work in a hosted environment for tons of library. I'd love to see really large libraries pick it up. We've got at least one representative here from a very large library that would like to use Folio. So the hosting, deployment are important considerations, but also processes. How does Folio wrap itself around and support work processes in individual libraries? How do you take these different apps and orchestrate them? So there's going to be a track, I think it's called the Resource Management Workshop track, where Harry Kaplanian and a bunch of the different development teams and SIG members that are working on resource management specifically will be talking about how we orchestrate and how these different apps fit together to support processes and workflows in libraries. And right after this, when I stop chatting here, I'm going to hand over to Kristen Martin and to Philip Jacobson, the UX lead, and to Shell from Index Data, to talk about a component or a core platform feature that we see as potentially really instrumental and important in that orchestration of apps. And that's the workflow management tool. The idea that Folio can view library work processes as first-class citizens to support tracking, to support management of individual processes, to support reporting across those different processes. We're also going to see meetings here focusing on reporting and analytics and how we enable Folio to support different kind of platforms that people might wish to use for reporting. So those are some of the key elements in the plenary track. I don't know how much room there'll be in that room. We'll have a session that I'm excited about after this plenary, where we'll talk about some future applications of Folio. Because in some ways, what's most exciting about Folio is not just that it can help people run a library today, but it can support a conversation about what libraries need in the future, and a shared conversation at that. So we'll have people talking about the applications of Folio potentially to support things like interlibrary loan, research data management, the creation of electronic objects, and so on. And just to not stick out, I want to share with you a clip from the Index Data internal wiki from exactly 1 year ago, almost to the day when we met in Dublin. And it was, as we referred to a couple of times, one of the first times when it was not just Index Data talking about and fretting about the platform, but we had people participating from Olay and from EBSCO. And the first day was business meetings, as it were yesterday, and there was an admonition from Lynn that nobody drinks too much at the end of it because there would be a meeting. But then this entry describing the first day, and I'd call your attention to the choice of the word gigantic, and it made me kind of curious about I don't know who wrote that, but I wonder how that person would have described this gathering. How would you describe a 190-person meeting if you thought 35 people were gigantic? And I do remember the rush of coming into that meeting and seeing all these people that we didn't know, and starting a conversation much like this one in a little bit, and being immediately interrupted by Jeremy, which to me set a really great tone for these meetings, in the sense that there's a sense of warmth and intimacy and people being welcome, and I want to repeat that, and I know it's been mentioned before, but this sense that there is a certain tone in Folio, I think, that has always felt, as the project grew, really welcoming and really warm, professional, interested, just nice. It's just a really nice group of people to be around. And so for anyone that's new to the project, I want to just, again, encourage you to participate. This meeting is critically important as a work meeting. We're moving into a phase of the project where that will be important for the successful outcome of Folio. How successful will we actually be in making something that can wrap itself around library processes? Everybody's sticking their head out of the water and looking across the pond a little bit and saying, hey, what's going on? Is there something not making sense? Is there something that's missing or not being spoken about? Speak up and ask. And for those people who have been here since that gigantic meeting, I would also say, if somebody asks a question and it was resolved, and you can say, hey, we dealt with that in the gigantic meeting, I would ask that those people, encourage them to say, either explain or revisit that discussion, or if that takes too long, suggest that you take it into one of the ample breaks to explore it, because it may be that the decision was wrong. We were just 35 people in that meeting, and we didn't know anything. We were just trying to figure it out, and we still are in a way. So please look across the pond and think about where you think we're headed. And with that, I just want to echo the other guys and wish you welcome. And I'm going to surrender a little bit of time to the workflow group. Unless there are any questions, Jeremy, would you like to weigh in? All right. Are there any questions or concerns or worries before we hand over about the logistics or anything I've said so far? All right. Oh, they want to use this. Oh.
very weak stand for the mic. Okay, maybe I'll just do that one, and then we don't have to worry about. Okay, is this picking things up? It sounds like it is. So, welcome everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Kristen Martin, and I am the convener of the Resource Management Special Interest Group. And I work at the University of Chicago, and we've been involved in this project for a while. So we are currently running the open source Koali Ole library system, and there are some things that we really love about it. There are some things that we don't really love about it, but that's why we're involved in this project, to keep those things that we feel like open source does so well, and then, you know, have software that works too. So that's our goal. And early on, we had some meetings with other people really focusing around electronic resources management, and we had some different opportunities to walk through the types of things that we were dealing with every day in our library, managing our resources, and thinking about this. What was going on was not just sort of having places to record things, places to pay for things, places to provide discovery, but there was this whole like subtext of shadow systems and special databases and spreadsheet munging that was happening in the context of trying to sort of answer questions like, why do we have access to that? What will happen if we, say, cancel our subscription? What are we going to do when this particular resource that we pay for but we don't actually manage physically within our library gets moved from point A to point B? How are we going to keep track of when we do a trial? And all of these questions kept coming up over and over again. And so in the context of our work with Philip, we started thinking about, you know, workflows, because that's one of the places that we'd always start with. Okay, well, here's what we do when we try to buy something. Here's the types of things that we have to do when we try to renew things. Here's what we do when we're troubleshooting things. And so this is where workflow was really growing out of. So I'm going to provide a context of overview for workflow within Folio, and then provide some examples that come from the Resource Management Special Interest Group. So I'll be crediting some other people for providing some of these examples as well. But this is not just about resource management. And as you'll see when Philip does his demo, or kind of walkthrough of the UX rather, he provides an example that's more along the lines from resource access and circulation. So when thinking about like a definition for workflow, what we're trying to provide here is a mechanism that's going to track tasks and status, provide for metrics, looking for bottlenecks, as well as define task sequence that might be automated or manual. So many of us have checklists, or so many of us aspire to have checklists, that, you know, this would be an opportunity to really marry that type of information that right now is happening completely external to the ILS and bring it in. And this is defining workflow sort of beyond any specific Folio app. And one of the concerns that we've had with Folio is, oh, you know, we're creating all these apps. How are they going to interact? So this is going to create this framework so that if you're doing something that maybe involves circulation, that's going to involve resource management, that involves cataloging, you can bring these things together and you're going to have a consistent way to do it. So this is really making workflow, like, rather than sort of being this thing that you have to figure out after the fact, it's making workflow central to the whole environment of Folio. So here are some examples of the types of things that workflow can do. So maybe it's just a matter of assigning tasks to people. So just basically like a bug tracking system, right? Just keeping track of where those things are. Or if there's ways that you can automate it, you can record when you're automating it. So anytime you have a step that maybe you've been doing it manually, but now you can use a workflow engine to help move that process more quickly. Or, you know, you've got a step where you're really depending on multiple different dependencies from different places. So here, workflow can bring those things together so that if there's just not one module involved, we can bring things together. So some of our principles that we wanted for workflows, we want something that's going to be flexible and modular. So we can have like a template where we say, okay, this is usually what happens. And then any time that we talk about this is usually what happens, it's always like, but in this case, we do something different. So we'd have these individual iterations that would be able to use this template but be modified on the fly. However, you have that template, you can save those steps. You don't have to make it up from scratch every single time. And so then the automation that I mentioned before. Maybe there's an automated mechanism to trigger workflows. I was just having a conversation with some people from Lehigh where they're saying, you know what, maybe after the 5th time that we ILL the same title, we want to add it to our collection. So that can be an automated trigger. Or maybe it's a manual, like somebody says, hey, guess what, we want to buy this database. All right, so now I'm going to trigger my workflow manually for that. And I think also something that makes me excited is that we could tag these workflows, we can share them within institutions. So if I say, hey, I figured out a great way to integrate my Gobi ordering, I can share that with anybody else using Gobi. So some other principles around workflow is being able to use a to-do list. So everybody has their own different ways of doing to-do lists, but why not do it, like if you're really working primarily within your library management system, have that to-do list be in the library management system so that you can do your work where the rest of your work is happening. And then thinking about this both, it's sort of like an individual, like, okay, what are the things that I have to do? Where are we on this particular workflow? As well as looking at things on an administrative level. Like, oh, you know what? This particular step is really problematic. Something is going wrong here. Maybe we need to revisit this. Maybe we can't really do anything about it, but at least, you know, we could communicate that this is where we're having some issues. Maybe it looks like there's a particular staff member who's getting stuck in an area. You know, so there's different ways that we could look at this on both an individual level and an administrative level. Or maybe when we run this template, we always modify this one step exactly the same way, so we should just modify the template. So I'm going to provide sort of 3 examples of some ways that I think workflows would be helpful to libraries. And like I said, most of these are coming from the resource management area, but you can just use your imagination as we go through this presentation to think about how workflows could help you. So the first example, and this comes from Texas A&M, is thinking about trial requests. And here we're sort of imagining like, okay, somebody requests a trial. Some of these steps could be manual. Some of these steps we might even be able to do something automated. And some of these might actually open up additional workflows. Like most of the time you don't need a license for a trial, but every now and then there's a publisher that does require a license to be in place for a trial. So then you could trigger a licensing workflow and you say, oh, we need a license. Maybe your trial is just going to be for on campus and it's password administered, but maybe you're going to be using your IP ranges and you haven't worked with this publisher before, so you need to set up your easy proxy because that's how you provide access for off campus. So then you might have an easy proxy workflow. And then you've sort of got some different scenarios that might happen. Maybe you get a trial request like right at the very beginning, so kind of up here. Well, maybe this doesn't happen at your library, but frequently people ask for trials and you're like, guess what? We have that. Isn't that a great answer? And so, maybe the system would help you just look and say, hey, guess you already have this. You can let the person know it's available right away, very fast. And then, maybe a trial isn't available. So again, you can have these different scenarios where you could branch from one direction to another. So my particular example that I pulled in thinking about how workflow would help me is with our licenses. So we're fairly lucky at Chicago in that we do have signatory power to be able to sign licenses within the library. But for a lot of libraries, that's not actually the case. So keeping track of where different licenses are, who's reviewing them, what the stage is something where I can see workflows really helping. And right now, we're basically doing it via spreadsheet and kind of keeping track in email. But here, you get this new resource, you have to get a license in place. Maybe you've got a licensing manager, it can go in their to-do list to review. The licensing manager might be negotiating the library terms, but then your legal counsel has to look at it. Your legal counsel doesn't care what kind of ILL rights are available. They're going to be looking at things about liability, indemnification. They're going to do those things. We're going to be returning that over to the vendor. You're going to go back and forth like 50 times or something as you work through this process. You're working on accessibility or whatever. So you can sort of keep track of where things are. Maybe it gets lost, like it goes over to legal counsel and everybody forgets about it, you can have some automated reminders to say, hey, they've had that for a couple weeks. I haven't heard anything. Let's see what's going on. And then, get your license signed. You can get it in Folio, and maybe there'd be some automated mechanism to record the terms. Maybe you do it, manually. You'd be able to record your terms. But the workflow would just help keep track of where that information is, so you could easily look it up without having to pull up your special spreadsheet outside of the system. So my last example, which comes courtesy of Duke University, is using their Trello board for migrations. So for those of you in the electronic resources management world, frequently a publisher has their content on one platform, and then they've decided they want to upgrade it and move it to another platform. You as a library generally don't have any control over the timing of this, but you really need to keep track of it so that you can make sure when that content moves from platform A to platform B, your users can still have access to it. So this is an example of a Trello board that Duke University is doing. They have a template over here for kind of a checklist, and then they can show what's in progress, what's been completed. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you were able to tie this to your platforms within your library system so that you wouldn't have a separate board? And so you can see here, this is their checklist of different things that you have to do when there's a platform migration. Okay, so you need to make sure that it's working with your proxy server. You need to make sure that people are informed when there's a platform migration. You need to make sure that your content actually does migrate over appropriately. And so these are all things where this is a process that might not be automated within Folio, but it would be a place where you can record what's available and what step you're at so that you would know. And so if any questions come up, you can say, oh, you know what, we didn't update the proxy server yet, so we need to do that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Philip, who's going to walk you through the prototype for how workflow support will look in Folio.
Hey folks. So I feel like a lot of what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes has been said already. But I can tell you a little bit about the sort of ergonomics of the interface of creating these workflows. So the general idea is in Folio, like Sebastian was talking about, that we try to split things up in small apps rather than large ones. And that means that all the things we've been discussing with Kristen and the other experts on resource management hasn't ended up becoming one single app in the system. So it's not like there is one workflows app. There is an app for workflows in which you can set up templates for your work, like Kristen was explaining, set up sequences of tasks that can be manually or automatically performed. And there's another app that allows you to see where those individual workflows are in progress. And then we have the rough outline for a handful of other apps that would allow you to automatically fill out forms that you need to often fill out with the same information and other things like that. So it's really a bundle of apps that perform this workflows related functionality. But the general idea, if we talk about how to set up workflows in the system, is that you would be able to, I don't have a pointer, but you'd basically be able to open an app and search and filter for the workflows that you have in your system. You'd also be able to go to a workflow store and find workflows from other institutions. And the way that the workflows are structured is that you're of course able to describe them with a title and a description, add some text to them so that they're easy to find once you have a few hundred workflows in your system. And then if something goes wrong, or if you need to change your workflow, you can set up which teams or which people in the institution can change stuff. And if the workflow fails when it runs, if there's some automatic thing that needs to happen that for some reason fails, you can set up who needs to be notified of this. So the general thing that we've discussed in the resource management, the workflow context, is that if we do automation in the system and it fails, we just want it to stop right there, probably, and then ask a human to work out how to fix it. So, yeah, one example that we've been given of how one might want to set up a workflow in the system is when there's a lot of holes on an item in your library. So when a lot of people have reserved or put a hole on an item in your library, you'd probably like to buy that item because there are people waiting in line for it. And so what we see here is an example of a workflow where the trigger for starting this workflow is that the status of an item in the library changes to being on hold. And that basically starts a little counter that adds a number to itself. And then when you have more than 6 holds, then a task is created for the person who has to buy the thing or decide if you want to buy it. So the subject librarian or the selector or the acquisitions team member or whoever it might be, depending on the library. You see a big button here saying import this workflow, and that's actually because the screenshot here is from the store that we imagine having. So once one library finds out how to do this thing, they'd be able to just click a publish button, and then all the libraries using Folio could do this. And another example that I think is quite interesting was a librarian I talked to who wanted to auto-transliterate a bunch of records from Arabic script to Latin script, or vice versa. And she actually had a colleague in another country who figured out how to do this. And he got it to work in his system, and they tried to get it to her library system, but they never got it working because different systems and different setups. And so I'm hoping that if we have a lot of people using Folio and they're all sort of using the same building blocks for doing their stuff, we'll be able to fix this sort of stuff. Right. So once you run a workflow, whether it starts automatically or manually, like Kristen talked about, you'd basically have this interface where you can see different lists of things that you yourself decide what are, so licensing, patron support, or other things. And in each of these lists, you'd have different workflows running with different steps and being able to see what step you're at in that workflow. And one of the small ergonomic things that we've talked about in the system that would be quite powerful and efficient in the long run, I think, is being able to pull in the interface that you need to interact with right in the to-do app, so that whenever you get to a step in your workflow, it just, if you need to order something, it pulls in the screen where you can select the version of the work you want to order. You can select what fund to take the money from, and so on. And perhaps even if you need to have an interaction with a colleague or a patron, we could pull that in right here. We still have details to figure out, but that's sort of the general notion of the to-do app. And yeah, I think that's a good overview. So Steph can tell you a little bit about the technical aspect of this.
Okay. So I think my part is a little bit less interesting from a business standpoint. It's a little bit more technical. But we kind of, excuse me, we took Kristen's and Philip's design and we kind of said, okay, how practical, what kind of effort do we need to put into implementing something like this? And obviously the first thing we need to do is, connect all these APIs that kind of give us this kind of functionality into a workflow. We wanted to make the technical solution as robust as possible, meaning we didn't necessarily want modules to know they're part of a workflow. We didn't really think that would necessarily be important for them to know this, and we didn't really want them to implement anything specific if we could avoid it. We wanted, of course, when you think about workflows, there's always some sort of processing that has to happen, in between steps. You make a call to a specific API. There's some sort of event that happens in the system that you want to react to. You want to kind of receive that input or whatever was passed in and kind of parse that, kind of see what's going on in the data and make a decision based on that. And we wanted to make that as robust as possible as well. You allow people to kind of script that if they need to, or give tooling that could be done in an easy way, and therefore make it really approachable, even to non-developers. Just basically, configure what you make this really configuration aware. Of course, there's a lot of services that are going to be running outside of Folio, especially in day one. So it had to interact well with those as well. Of course, it has to be scheduled, the basic workflow stuff. Has to be scheduled, highly available, fault tolerant. If something crashes in the middle, you want to be able to pick up where you left off. We want it to live, inside Folio as a Folio module. And I think like the most important thing, I guess, would be not to build it from scratch. We know that this is something that will take quite a while to build if you need to build everything yourself. So that was one of the things we were looking for when building the solution. Okay, what does exist out there in the open source community that we can kind of use to kind of build this thing? I'm going to actually start with that and the technical building blocks that we used, at least to build the POC. This may change, but right now this is how we built the POC. Of course, Folio is very, at least the core modules that have been built have been based on Vertex. And there is a Folio framework called RMB that does a ton of boilerplating for you, whether it be code generation. It kind of starts up a web server, does a lot of code generation for you, validation, a lot of tools that work with databases and with Postgres and so on. So we kind of started there. And then obviously the core of a workflow engine is a state machine that kind of moves you from one step to another based on events and makes decisions based on that. And we built the POC using Spring. We went into the Spring ecosystem, which is a Java open source project with a ton of different components, and we pulled out the state machine component and decided to use that as the core state machine, within the workflow engine. We pulled out Quartz, which is a scheduling a framework, and the final piece was, since we had a need to serialize the workflow to the database, persisted consistent at every single state change, so it would be fault tolerant. We used Cryo for that, so we kind of, every time there is a change to the state, we can serialize that and store it in the database so we can always continue where we left off. And I think like when we put all these together and kind of started gluing them together, I think 85% of the coding that we needed was already done, and what was left was kind of, okay, how do we solve conceptual problems using this? And that will kind of, that kind of has to do with, okay, how do we build these workflows based on on Folio, which is an API-driven system. And I think the first problem was pretty easy to solve, and that was just, just regular automated workflows where you have, I don't know, probably a non-existent workflow, but you want to run every midnight, you want to make a call to the circulation app, get back every item that will be overdue within 24 hours, and then get the user IDs, parse the user IDs from that, go to the user app, get their emails, and then send them an email that it's going to be, that they have an item that's overdue within the next 24 hours. So that is a completely automated workflow. If you think about it, that's kind of what a lot of our business modules do anyway. Kind of, they're kind of like workflow engines anyway, just internally with a lot of business logic in there. But that was kind of like a very easy thing to implement because we got that out of the box already with, with decision making and if and else and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of got that out of the box. We just needed to kind of glue that together into this entire the framework that we're kind of building. The slightly more challenging part of this was reacting to external events like human interactions. How do we kind of combine these automated workflows with human interactions? The to-do app was mentioned. So, I may, if I have if I may decide that every day I want to find out what new users have been added to the system, and then send a request to the To-Do app of a specific librarian to issue library cards. I don't know if that exists, but like issue library cards for those. And that's kind of like a completely manual operation that could take a day, 2 days, it could take a week. And then once that happens, we want to be notified. So we can then maybe send an email to all those users, tell them, come pick up your library card because at the desk, at the library desk. And what we decided to do here is, if we look at this picture, at this diagram, we kind of see kind of how Folio works. We have Okapi kind of as the gatekeeper where APIs come in, and Okapi kind of routes requests to modules within Folio. And what we did was kind of say, okay, well, why don't we have the workflow register with Okapi on events that it's interested in, and that belong to specific workflows, so that if I want to know that the to-do for the specific library card issuing has been completed, or there's been some sort of update to this, I'm interested in that, send that to me, because that belongs to a specific workflow that is waiting on the specific event. And that's how we approached that aspect of the human interaction, the asynchronous part of workflows. And I think based on that, I'll kind of summarize what we've put together for the POC. So of course, just like every Folio module, there's a registration. There's the need to register a module. So that's kind of something we get for free anyway, because we've implemented this with the R&B framework. The ability to create workflows. I think Philip and Kristen, they mentioned a template that can be shared. So we've implemented this as kind of like a JSON file that you can kind of declare steps and triggers and decision making and so on. And that's kind of like your template. And you can create one and save it to the database, and you have a workflow template. When you decide to run a workflow, we actually create an instance of that workflow. We take that JSON and we convert it into a Spring State machine. We kind of serialize that into a Spring State machine. And we save that into an instance table. And basically, if you run it manually, immediately we kind of schedule that with Quartz and say, okay, run this instance now. And basically every change that occurs gets persisted as well. So we always keep track of where, what the state is of the workflow that is running. I mentioned I call it internal events, where basically these are synchronous events where we don't really need any human interaction. Basically, we can just keep on going without the need of any external events. We have the external events, which are also supported in the POC to kind of really understand if this concept does hold water. And this actually played pretty well together. And we saw it working pretty well. As I mentioned, everything is persisted, everything is consistently persisted to the database. So there's always the workflow, the instance is always updated. We also store the data of previous steps. So you can always, every step can say, okay, I want to process data from this step or from that step, or I want to process data from the last 2 steps, and I want to kind of parse them, and I want to see what's there, and I want to make a decision based on that, which allows us to, and because of that, it gives really a lot of power and a lot of flexibility, because while we've implemented a couple of very naive toolings that allow you to parse JSON or multiple JSONs and make decisions based on that. But you kind of script this, whether it be in JavaScript or anything like that, and really do like hardcore processing and even logic, and make decisions of where you want to go to next. And the scheduling as well is something that we've played around with and implemented, and have the kind of cron style scheduler, highly available schedule that allows us to run these and continue running them and resuming and so on. And That's it. I won't be able to. From here. Thank you.
General questions you guys want to stand? Yes. Raise your hand. We'll take questions. This is not a shy group, so I'm sure there's going to be some questions. Or not. Yes, Jeremy. Philip? Shale? Right here.
I guess you mentioned something about the similarity between these workflows and logic functions. Can you talk about like things these workflows like creating?
Maybe wrong. I think we've chatted a little bit about, you're starting to build something that can potentially support business logic, and there's a model within Folio that we try to organize things in layers of storage logic, business logic, maybe layered, and then UIs on top. So where does this fit in? And I think the perspective that I've had on it as the thinking about it matured was that this kind of fits into the Folio ecosystem in place of, if we think of Folio as an operating system, it can serve as a shell language, as a batch processing tool, as a way to orchestrate other tasks. I think you might find fairly quickly that if you're trying to build something more sophisticated or complex, that it might make sense for ergonomic purposes or other reasons to build an app for it. But it feels like a tool that can, in the same way that we do on Unix, for those people who hang around on Unix systems, sometimes use batch scripts, shell scripts, and pipes to orchestrate these pieces. The workflow system can be glue between applications, so it allows us to build up more complex structures out of simple building blocks. So it does end up with, I think there's going to be value in building these modular apps, both because it allows us to orchestrate things that we already do today as far as library processes, but also integrate new apps. If somebody comes along and builds a plugin for a long-term preservation system or an institutional repository, publishing workflow, a digitization workflow, you can start to stitch them in together with these other pieces. So it's going to be a balance, right? And there's probably going to be some people, just like there are people who like to use batch scripts or shell scripts for everything, will do things with the workflow system that they oughtn't. But that will be where I see it fitting in. As essentially, to my mind, it's what completes Folio as an operating system. And it not an operating system in the sense of, this lets you, build text processing tool the way Unix did, but an operating system specifically geared to managing complex administrative processes spread across potentially organizations with tons of different members and different departments, and with a very high volume potentially of things passing through. So both processes involving, EIM platform renewal is something that you hopefully only have to do fairly rarely, but you have to do it for a lot of different things, and the workflows will be quite different. Workflows around acquisitions of new volumes will, for some libraries, be a massive pipeline of things that will be kind of juggled and taken care of at one time, right? So it's both orchestrating the tasks, but a lot of it is also about being able to follow the tasks and report on the tasks afterwards, not in terms of some arbitrary way that you've munged the workflow into some specific unit of functionality in a system, but essentially do reporting based on the actual processes that exist in the library. So I think the vision really is one where the system is more amenable to wrapping around the processes in a library than requiring the library to wrap itself around some monolithic piece of software. So, any other questions or thoughts? Yep, true. When? So I think the question was we talked a little bit about the idea of sharing workflows, but you're thinking that say a specific publisher might actually share a workflow model. Right, yeah, true. I mean, so the idea is also to pick up on this notion of the App Store and the ability to share workflows both between libraries within the community, but also from potentially vendors that might publish an app together with workflow templates that would allow it to slot into different things, for sure. Another aspect I think that's been important coming out of this, the proof of concept effort was a lot about trying to figure out, well, how do you take something like this, which feels in some ways as ambitious as Folio itself, and break it down. And realizing, I think, that once you start to break it down and proving the concept and looking at what tools you can actually reuse and adapt, what seems to emerge is both a progression of building this out that would give you useful bits and pieces of this without requiring you to build everything. The visual programming environment is daunting for lots of different reasons, but you don't need that to get started. If you can build your workflows in a text file, you can start to use the system. It needs building blocks like the scheduling tool, like a mechanism for managing events within Folio, and other kinds of elements that we need for other things. You know, we need a messaging environment to be able to synchronize an external discovery layer to push data into a union catalog, to drive potentially synchronization of knowledge bases and lots of other pieces. So you end up with building blocks that can serve lots of other purposes that end up along the way supporting this. So the hope is to, resources allow to have useful bits of this available on the V1 timeline, so that people can actually use it and think about it. But one of the reasons that we wanted to talk about this today was also to inform and to maybe inspire some of the other sessions that are going to be thinking about building processes and figuring out how all of these things orchestrate or play together in a complete system. Yes.
All right. Just one last logistical update. We have built in substantial breaks right after the plenary every day and at lunchtime for an extended lunch. That we have found that time to be critically important to chat with colleagues, get to know people, have anecdotal conversations. So use that time, please, with one another while you can for the next few days. It's great to have face-to-face conversations, and you can't replace that. So I want to encourage that. Also, I want to point out that there are many tracks in the schedule. They are designed to be very specific. Kate and Jakob spent a lot of time with a lot of input from many of you about what were the most important things we wanted to cover. So take a look at the schedule and make good choices about where to spend your time. And also, I wanted to point out that there is a general track available as well. There are a lot of interesting updates there about marketing, the website, different vendor interests, and there's also a session that is taking a look at things beyond the ILS, so if that's interesting to you. And then a reminder that tomorrow and Thursday there are also plenaries, just like this, where we're going to be describing individual components of the platform and also take a look at the roadmap and our plans. So please make sure to come and join us for that. Breakfast here, 7 to 8:30, the plenary 8:30 to 10 on Wednesday and Thursday. With that, I hand you off to your first break, and have a great day, and we will see you at the reception tonight at Duke. Thank you so much.